Where are they now? Modern decks that have disappeared. Let's talk about them. Everyone, this is Nikachu, Merfolk Master, and over the years, as new archetypes come up or as the metagame shifts, some archetypes just fade away into oblivion, or Magic has taken a new direction that certain decks just don't seem to have a foot in the door anymore. Or maybe it's just 2019 and 2020 talk. And let's talk about all the decks that have basically disappeared over the last few years. Let's start it all off with Titan Shift. That's right. Titan Shift. Not Amulet, not the Elvish Reclaimer toolbox deck. Titan Shift. You know, once upon a time, if you wanted to play Valakut the Molten Pinnacle, you had to get about 7 to 8 lands in play, then you actually cast a card called Scape Shift. You sacrificed your entire field to get the Valakuts on the battlefield and enough mountains to shoot your opponent to death. Or you could actually get Primeval Titan. Now get those Valakuts and then the next turn attack with Primeval Titan to shoot your opponent for 1,000,000. What on earth happened? This deck, I mean, the strategy was basically hold in diarrhea for like 3 hours and then boom, explode it all out on the battlefield. You see that Primeval Titan? It says, when nature calls run. He's in the squatting position because he's about to, unleash a nasty that no one wants to be a part of. When Dry to the Elysian Grove got printed, I mean, basically Amulet can say, anything you can do, I can do better, because the Amulet decks now could play Valakut the Molten Pinnacle. And they don't need to play any mountains. The Scape Shift decks were just a strictly worse Valakut deck than the Dry to the Elysian Grove versions. And sure, they could play Dry to the Elysian Grove, but not nearly as well as Amulet or the Elvish Reclaimer versions. So anyway, that is the reason we do not see Scape Shift whatsoever. Dry to the Elysian Grove basically killed the archetype. Moving on to Infect. Infect has had a little bit of trouble over the last little while. There is an insane number of removal spells in the format. I mean, between Lightning Bolt and Fatal Push, we now have Lava Darts that this deck has to deal with. So there is an infinite amount of very cheap, efficient removal that can more or less overload any Infect's like suite of pump spells to protect their creatures, even for hexproof. The Infect creatures also have some trouble against, well, Plague Engineer. I mean, Plague Engineer is, it's still a beating. It's still a beating for a lot of tribal decks, but it's also a beating for the Infect decks, because all you have to do is you name the creature type of their Infect creatures and they're just dead on the spot. They can't protect them until end of turn. So those are also a lot of things that the Infect players have to deal with. And it's just a scary environment for Infect. And by the way, I think you can learn a lot about someone's sexual performance based on how they play the Infect deck. Let me explain. See, it all depends. If there are some Infect players, they like to take it slow. They like to be patient. They like a little back and forth. And you know what? At the end of the game, even if they win, maybe the opponent had a good time. Maybe the opponent wants to play again. But then there's another type of Infect player. They want to win as quickly as possible. They want to go guns blazing, blow everything in the first few turns. They're the 1 minute man, both in bed and at FNM. And when you're trying to win as quickly as possible, nobody wins in that scenario. Your opponent doesn't win. Sometimes the Infect player doesn't win. Backfires on them. No, nobody's happy with that. Don't expect your opponent to call you up to play again. Lantern Control was a very, very unique archetype because it basically turned all your valuable cards into bullshit. I mean, they turned them into shit. Oh, you got something good on top of your library? We're going to turn it into shit. It just goes straight to the graveyard. Now, the thing is, the value of shit one day went up. See, one day no one knew what to do with shit, but then when they realized, hey, you actually can use shit to, like, grow your garden, and it's manure and it has good nutrients for the soil, the value of shit went up. It was stonks, because the deal is, over time, Wizards of the Coast made the graveyard. It was an extension of your hand, and over time, Dredge started to come up in prominence when Creeping Chills were printed. Now those prized amalgams, everything coming back from the graveyard between prized amalgams and Bloodghast, very, very valuable. Also, the Izzet Phoenix stacks, those Arclight Phoenixes. I mean, what are you going to do? Put them in the graveyard? They're just going to come back to the battlefield and attack you for a lot. And also, Krark Clan Ironworks. I mean, big deal. Krark Clan Ironworks, you can put all the stuff in the graveyard, but they're just going to return the stuff back to the battlefield with things like Mirror Retriever. I mean, that's the whole deal. The deck was able to utilize the graveyard. So all of a sudden, that shit were stonks. It stonks. We're sitting on a gold mine here. And that's what happened to Lantern Control. Basically, it became powerless. Also, let's not forget that at the time, it was competing. It was a Mox Opal deck, very powerful Mox Opal deck, but competing with an even more powerful Mox Opal deck, Krark Clan Ironworks. And if you were to choose one Mox Opal deck over the other one, you're going to go for the one that's outright more powerful, uses their graveyard the best while ignoring the opponent's graveyard. Since the banning of Krark Clan Ironworks, this deck took other hits like the banning of Mox Opal, but even then, the graveyard is still an extension of everyone's hand. It's still a very large source of card advantage and value, and I would not assume that Lantern Control has a really good position in the metagame even today. Oh, poor elves. I mean, Modern Horizons. You are the chosen one! You are supposed to save the tribal next, not destroy them! Now, Devoted Druid is an archetype that we've just recently seen almost disappear, and it's come and go at times. The main problem with the deck is if an opponent has like infinite removal, and certainly Modern has its share of infinite removal, the deck has trouble sticking, even if you have infinite ways of like bringing cards back, and even Lurrus has been brought into the mix and still wasn't enough even in today's Modern metagame. So the deal is this. It's strictly competing with another deck that is also very strong, the Heliod Company decks. Now, these Heliod Company decks, they're just 2-card combos between Heliod Suncrowned and Walking Ballista, or paired with Spike Feeder. So those are two-card combos that this deck just easily assembles together with no more effort, whereas the Devoted Druid decks, you had to have Devoted Druid stick, untap with it, and then have Vizier of Remedies come in play, and then you used it to then find a win condition. So it's more like a 3-card combo. It's a little bit more difficult and a lot less resistant to removal. Heliod Suncrown being indestructible makes this combo a lot easier to pull off, and there's a lot of ways of setting up the combo that makes it more resilient or just win on the spot, and it's going to be a much better paper combo is because you can like win with infinite life very easily. But basically, I mean, people are just looking at it's like the little kid looking at Woody and Buzz Lightyear and just saying, you know what, I don't want to play with you anymore. Now, the affinity players, they are going to go to the grave, saying that their deck is dead. We're talking affinity with a cranial plating affinity, the old-fashioned one. They just try to spew a bunch of creatures on the battlefield with Memnite and Ornithopter, that version of affinity, and kill your opponent as quickly as possible, especially with Mox Opal. And they will go to the grave saying that their deck died because of Mox Opal. Because of Mox Opal, that was the moment that their deck died. I'm sorry, I was there when Mox Opal got banned, but I was also there when Karn the Great Creator got printed. And the moment this card got printed, and it says, activated abilities of artifacts your opponent's control can't be activated. Goodbye Ravager, goodbye Steel Overseer, goodbye Cranial Plating, goodbye Springleaf Drum, goodbye basically your whole deck. The moment this card was printed, Classic Affinity crashed to 0% of the metagame. 0, all right? 0%. Not 0.5%. 0 is dead. It just died. Thanks to the printing of Karn the Great Creator. And I mean, every deck wanted to play it. Like Amulet tried it. Some Titan Shift decks tried it. What else? Of course, Eldrazi was the premier deck playing it. Also, there was many different variations of Karn the Great Creator out there. And you had to beat it. And guess what? The Affinity decks, they had no chance. They had no chance, and they could not beat it. And then a few months go by. They ban Mox Opal, and now that's when your deck dies. The Affinity players will say, Listen, this is when the deck died. This is when it went to 0%. You can have all the Mox Opals you want. You're like it didn't matter. The Affinity basically crashed and burned the moment that Karn the Great Creator got printed. And so long as Karn the Great Creator is still in the metagame, is still a prominent card, is still a win condition, the classic Affinity build will always struggle. What happened to Eldrazi taxes? Exactly where did that thing go? We have Death and Taxes in the metagame. Why don't we have Eldrazi Taxes? And I think what it really comes down to is how good is Wasteland Strangler. And let me tell you, as a Merfolk player, I find that this card is a huge beating. They can take like a card out of my hand, out of Tidehallow Sculler, and then they play Wasteland Strangler. Now get rid of the card that was exiled by Tidehallow Sculler into my graveyard and kill one of my creatures. I mean, that is just backbreaking. It's basically a 2-for-1. Easy death to me. But what is Wasteland Strangler doing in a world of like, I don't know, 6/6 Primeval Titans, the Uros, the Omnas, the Death Shadow, the Scourge of the Skyclaves? Do you know what? It's not looking all that impressive in a world where there's also a lot of combo decks. There's not even any creatures to target. Things like Belcher and oops all spells. So I mean, Wasteland Strangler doesn't have a lot of good targets, not super well positioned, and as a result I don't think the Eldrazi and Taxes deck is super well positioned. But if we can get to a more creature centric version of Modern, where there's a lot of creatures where this thing can kill, yeah, I mean, like, then we might see Eldrazi and Taxes come back again. I mean, if you try to Wasteland Strangler Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath, you're not gonna kill it. You're just gonna piss it off. So I hope that gives some insight about where these decks have gone and why. If you liked the video, don't forget to give a thumbs up. If you liked the video, don't forget to give a thumbs up. If there are any other archetypes you think maybe should have made this list, let me know in the comments section below. And I think the Elves community can agree that we need to ban Plague Engineer.